The following is distributed by the Berean Call.
Welcome. You're listening to the audio version of the Berean Call newsletter for August 2022. Thank you for listening. I'm Gary Carmichael, and I will be reading this month's feature article entitled Israel and Prophetic Proof, Part 1, written by the late founder of the Berean Call, Dave Hunt. And I will bring again the captivity of my people of Israel, and they shall build the waste cities and inhabit them, and they shall no more be pulled up out of their land, which I have given them, saith the Lord thy God. Amos chapter 9, verses 14 to 15. About 250 years ago, the King of Sweden had troubling doubts about whether the Bible was really true in every word. He asked Count von Zinzendorf, bishop of the Moravian Church, to give him proof that the Bible was truly inspired of God. The king had set aside 10 hours to hear what might be said. To His Majesty's surprise, Zinzendorf informed him that the time allotted was far too much. He only needed to say one word. Astonished, the king asked what that could be. The count replied, Jews. Today we would add one more word, Israel. In Zinzendorf's day, that tiny and beleaguered nation, born on May 14, 1948, did not exist except in the hearts of Zionists who had never given up awaiting the fulfillment of the God of Israel's solemn promises. The continued existence of Israel today, surrounded by more than 1 billion Muslims who have sworn to exterminate her and who continually plot and repeatedly attack her in the attempt to do so, is one of the most astonishing miracles of modern times. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob has blessed the Jewish people with a brilliance that generally far exceeds the norm. In the Jewish population of 14 million, 1/100th of the Arab world, there are 165 Nobelists, 51 for medicine, 45 for physics, 27 for chemistry, 22 for economics, 11 for literature, and 9 for peace. This is astonishing. Supporting the amazing facts surrounding Israel, there are literally dozens of biblical prophecies foretelling her sudden rise to become the world's premier military power. The persistent attacks upon her from Muslim nations and the fear of Israel that grips hostile Arab neighbors today. Yes, well might they fear her. Israel could wipe them out very quickly if she chose to do so. Instead, she has all too patiently endured their outspoken hatred, insults, repeated open threats of extermination, persistent rocket and terrorist attacks, and their continued feverish efforts to build the nuclear capability to destroy her. Israel's patience ends when the threat becomes too dangerous. As it was with Syria, that may soon be the case with Iran, which is hoping one day to launch a nuclear attack on Israel. Iran would then become the hero of the Islamic world. If such an attack became possible, it would force Israel to preemptively destroy Iran's nuclear facilities, as it did after Syria's attempt to develop nuclear capabilities. For months, by satellite, Israel followed ship after ship from North Korea as they landed in Syria and watched the convoys of trucks as they discharged their cargo in a quote-unquote secret desert destination. She patiently watched the construction of a nuclear facility disguised as a quote-unquote cement plant and ridiculously surrounded by the latest Russian radar and surface-to-air missiles. The evidence was shown to President George W. Bush, including photos taken inside the facility and missiles and radar protecting the unusual cement. Condoleezza Rice, whose replacement theology prevents her from being a true friend of Israel, was not consulted. The State Department has long been the enemy of Israel. With Bush's tacit approval, Israeli planes went in and destroyed the nuclear facility along with the latest Russian protection surrounding it. How did Israeli planes pierce these sophisticated defenses? They are not sharing that secret with anyone, least of all with our quote-unquote friends in the State Department. These current events, like so many others, have been foretold in the Bible. In spite of their accuracy, critics deny their relevance. Some claim to be former Christians. One can only wonder what kind of quote-unquote Christians they were to remain in such complete ignorance of the Bible while pretending to know it so well. Gary Lanier, for example, says that he, quote, spent 15 years in the church, released 9 contemporary Christian music albums, was nominated for 6 Gospel Music Awards, preached the gospel around the world, and served as a voluntary chaplain for the military department, end quote. He writes in an infidel manifesto, quote, biblical prophecy is perhaps the most powerful tool for religious delusion. Look at any so-called prophecies in Scripture. The wording is so general that you could attach almost any event and say, look, this is a fulfilled prophecy. That is exactly why there are thousands of people today saying that they are witnessing prophecies being fulfilled in our generation. Most of the so-called prophecies were never intended as prophetical in the first place. The words are so general, you could make them to mean almost anything. Take a look at them without the dogma of your local preacher. End quote. This is so pitiful that it is embarrassing. This quote-unquote expert on Bible prophecy offers little more than inexcusable ignorance and prejudice. He says, quote, any so-called prophecies, end quote. While some prophecies are difficult to understand, there are hundreds that clearly have been fulfilled to the letter, and some are still in the process of being fulfilled. So general you could make them to mean almost anything? In fact, they are so specific that Lanier's statements would be laughable were they not influencing so many to turn from God. Here is one of numerous prophecies, circa 600 BC, of which the specificity cannot be denied. Quote, therefore, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that it shall no more be said, the Lord liveth that brought up the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt. But the Lord liveth that brought up the children of Israel from the land of the north, and from all the lands whither he had driven them. See Jeremiah 16, verses 14 to 15, and 23, verses 7 to 8. Notice the detailed prophetic elements, as the deliverance from the land of Egypt spoken of in the book of Exodus was what Jews looked back to each year in the Passover as a reminder of God's love and power. That event would fade from its prominence in their minds to be replaced by something more recent. The prophecy has 2 distinct parts. 1, a confirmation of many previous prophecies that the Jews were going to be led captive into every nation. Luke 21, verse 24, and 2, their eventual deliverance and return to Israel would almost eclipse from the national memory their deliverance from Egypt. And so it has happened. The great proof that the Bible repeatedly offers of its veracity is the fact that God, through His prophets, tells what will happen centuries and even thousands of years in advance. There is no arguing with the precise detail and accuracy of any of the Bible's hundreds of prophecies. Yet Lanier, in typical atheist fashion, declared that most prophecies were so general that one could make them mean almost anything. Not so. Lanier is either deliberately attempting to mislead his readers, or he is displaying an abysmal ignorance. Most prophecies are, in fact, so specific that no one could argue with their meaning. In Joel 3:2, circa 800 BC, God declared that the day was coming when all nations would join to divide the land of Israel. I will also gather all nations, and will plead with them, that is, punish them, for my people and for my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations, and parted my land. This is remarkable. Throughout its entire 3,000-plus year history, the land of Israel had never been divided. It had been conquered by various nations, but even when the Turks held it as part of their Ottoman Empire for 400 years, they did not divide the land. A conqueror keeps the land he has conquered intact for himself. Why divide it? This division of Israel has occurred only in our day. Britain, which had been placed in charge of Palestine by the Allied forces who had conquered it in World War I, had been given the mandate by the League of Nations to see that this land should remain as a refuge for the Jews, who had been scattered everywhere. Instead of fulfilling this mandate, Britain gave about 75% of the land to the Arab Muslims in exchange for oil. In 1947, the United Nations, through Resolution 181 and the fulfillment of Joel 3:2, formalized this breach of trust. Israel finally received a mere 13% of what they had been promised. This is now history. Britain and the UN infamously fulfilled Joel 3:2 and parted God's land. The God of Israel, knowing all that would happen, had warned in advance that he would avenge himself for this brazen robbery of his people. After being attacked by Muslim nations who were following Allah's edict through Muhammad that all Jews must be destroyed, Israel, in self-defense, recaptured some of this land. Christ himself made a number of prophecies before his crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension. Like many other Hebrew prophets, Christ foretold the scattering of Jews all over the earth and the coming Great Tribulation. Luke 21, verses 24 through 26. Also, in Luke 21:24, there is a remarkable and very specific prophecy concerning Jerusalem itself. Jesus declared, "Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled." When did this treading down of Jerusalem by Gentiles begin? In fact, it has been going on for centuries, beginning with Nebuchadnezzar's destruction of Jerusalem, 2 Kings 24, verses 10 through 11, dated 587 to 586 BC. This prophecy tells us of what Christ called the times of the Gentiles. As it has so often, the existence of the United Nations played a key role. In partial fulfillment of Christ's prophecy, a vital part of UN Resolution 181 was the declaration that Jerusalem would be a corpus separatum, never part of Israel and never under the control of Jews. Consider how specific the following is from the prophet Zechariah. "Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people round about, when they shall be in the siege both against Judah and against Jerusalem. And in that day I will make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it." Zechariah 12, verses 2 and 3. Two groups are distinguished by the prophet: all the people round about Judah and Jerusalem, and all the people of the earth. These groups are identified by two separate prophecies. To the first group, Jerusalem will be a cup of trembling, and to the second group, a burdensome stone. The first group is further identified as being united together in a siege against Judah and Jerusalem. The second group as gathered together against her. Why will Israel be a cup of trembling to her neighbors? As we have just pointed out, Israel is the premier military power in the world, and she could wipe out her Arab neighbors very quickly, but refrains from doing so. As for being a burdensome stone, how better to show the fulfillment of this specific prophecy than by the fact that from 1967 to 1989, out of 865 resolutions in the Security Council and General Assembly of the UN, 526 were against Israel. As we have pointed out, that was the first time that Israel had ever been divided. Now we also see the first time that all nations surrounding it have been united in a common goal. Traditionally, these nations had been enemies. What unites them now?
They are all Muslims, and it is Islam, which did not even exist at the time of the prophecy, that joins them in the common desire to destroy Israel. For all nations to be united against Israel, there would have to be an organization of all nations. The United Nations came into existence in 1945, just in time to be the means of fulfilling this prophecy. This 2,500-year-old prophecy is both specific in its details and flawless in its accuracy. Another amazing prophecy concerns antisemitism. There is no rational explanation for this implacable hatred that has continued over several thousand years. What fuels this insane obsession is the determination to exterminate the Jews. No other national people have been the long-term targets of such a goal. In the secret war against the Jews, Mark Aarons and John Loftus write, quote, "For more than 20 centuries, Jews have been persecuted, uprooted, and annihilated. Yes, many other groups have suffered grievously at the hands of tyrants, but there is a crucial difference. In each of these cases, the genocide was intended to serve a deeper purpose, the conquest of territory, the acquisition of wealth, the enlargement of political power. In contrast, the genocide of the Jewish people was not attempted in order to achieve a more fundamental purpose. It was the fundamental purpose. This is what makes the Nazi Holocaust unique." End quote. Yes, many groups of people have suffered greatly. The Muslims wiped out more than 1 million Armenians as well as millions of other peoples throughout history. Thousands of blacks were transported from Africa to the American colonies to become slaves in a trade begun by Arabs and assisted by Africans. However, the quote above indicates that the intent was not to exterminate these people and has been and still is the Muslims' goal with the Jews. Incredibly, the obvious lie persists by religious and political leaders such as recent popes, former leaders President Bush and British Prime Minister Tony Blair, and President Obama, that Islam is a religion of peace and has been maligned by critics. In fact, Muslims have murdered millions in their long-standing goal to take over the world. And there is an ongoing slaughter that continues to this day in Indonesia, Sudan, Nigeria, and elsewhere. In contrast to the persistent praise of Islam as a force for peace in the world, Israel, which has never voiced unprovoked threats against other nations and has acted only in self-defense, has been accused repeatedly in the United Nations of aggression against innocent neighbors. Fulfilled biblical prophecy stands as undeniable proof that the God of the Bible exists. Furthermore, these many prophecies, of which we will, God willing, have more to say next month, stand as a warning to the world of coming judgment. We will also review the many promises of blessing for those who will heed God's word concerning Israel. Dave Hunt. Please visit our website, thebereancall.org, to access our radio archives going back to 1999 and our newsletter going back to 1986. We offer daily updates by email or visit us on Facebook or Twitter. Are you looking for information about a specific topic? Go to thebereancall.org and click on Topics at the top of the page. Our online store is thebereancall.com. We offer a wide variety of books, tracts, CDs, and DVDs. Note that most of our ebooks are free. I'm Gary Carmichael. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope you can join us again next week. Until then, we encourage you to search the Scriptures 24/7.
Though none go with me, I still will follow. No turning back, no turning back.